Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to another important lecture on today. We're going to start altogether a different section, right? And today we see on this screen sporting learning process, right? So we have been talking about language teaching and how to teach language well, how to make a lesson plan, how to have an excellent micro teaching, how to have your presentation stage, how to have your production stage, how to have your practice stage and all that. So today we will see how to support that learning process, right? So we'll be talking about this learning process, in fact, and particularly how to support this learning process, and of course in the lectures to come as well. And today we will start the first part of this supporting learning process. We will see these are the topics that we'll be talking about today's lecture and in the lectures to come. Content-based instructions, CBI, right? Course books, how to use course books in language teaching. Then CAL, computer assisted language learning. Then learning styles, learners' autonomy in the classroom, and classroom based assessment, right? These are of course the topics that we'll be talking about one by one. We have different lectures, in fact one lecture on each, in fact the process, right? First lecture will be on today's lecture, that is 26, will be on CBI, and then so on we'll move on, right? So let's start as per the routine. First of all, review the last lecture. So in the last lecture we talked about, yes, testing language, right? And of course testing language proficiency. And we talked about types of language test. Remember, we talked about achievement test. Remember, we talked about what else? Other proficiency test, right? That of course, what does a proficiency test aim at? What does an achievement test aim at, in fact? And then we try to in fact describe these tests. We call them subjective tests, we call them objective tests, we call them integrative tests, we call them discrete point tests. These are the different ways we use to describe tests. And then of course we evaluated the usefulness of a language test. While evaluating, you see, we saw that, well, that you see reliability of a test is important, validity of test is important, then its practicality is important, and of course interactiveness is equally important. So in this way we try to evaluate what the usefulness of language test. And then we had an overview of the common language test. Remember, we talked about TOEFL, we talked about IELTS, and we had a discussion on TOEIC, and finally we had of course a brief overview on CAEL, Canadian Academic English Language. This was the overview on different language the test, and then we saw impact of testing on learning and teaching. And I of course I directed you to read more about these things, because we did not have much time to discuss those things. Of course you will have your handbook with you and you will see things, but again research more on these language tests, so that once you will be teaching IELTS students, TOEFL students, TOEIC students or CAEL students, you can do well. In fact, a lot is available, right, online. You can see, you can read, and you can update yourself and to be a good language teacher. And particularly, of course, now the time is, and of course for the future is, that you will be teaching IELTS students, you will be teaching TOEFL students and other language. You'll be preparing students for these international of course tests, right? And then we had a discussion on critical use of language test, and finally we talk about testing questions. Of course the question that you are of course writing, then does it test what you want to test, in fact? And then the last point was that is language testing fair or not? So it's a debatable topic. There are some people who are for it and there are some people who are against it. So let's move on. Today's topic, that is of course that is sport. How we can support learning process, in fact. And the first thing is, that is a theory, CBI, content based instructions, right? What do you call it? CBI, C for content, B for based, and instructions. Again, it's a theory. And what is CBI? What is content based instruction? right? And how it supports learning process. This is important. So my dear students, CBI refers to the teaching of language through exposure to the content that is interesting and relevant to the learner. See, interest of the learner is important. Then relevance of that content to the learner is equally important. See, so 2 points are there. What CBI refers to, that when you teach language, right, you expose students to the content that is, of course, I mean, that is useful, that is interesting for the learner, and also that is relevant to the learner, right? So relevance, you are teaching business students, see that language content, yes, does it, I mean, help the learner or not? Fine. So relevance of the language, the business English to the business students, relevance of the English to the engineering students, relevance of that English to economic students, relevant of that English to IR students or mass comm students. This is very important, right? And again, you see that is it interesting for them or not? Because mind you that, of course, learning of a language should be fun learning. If the learner enjoys it, if the learner takes interest in it, you will see that the learning would be fun. Teaching would be fun then, and that is a real learning. When you learn in a stress-free environment. So that learning, my dear students, is a better learning. Because why? That learning becomes meaningful learning, right? And if it is a meaningful learning, my dear students, what happens? You see, you can use that, you can apply that, of course, and you will be what? I mean, of course, you'll be ready for every situation wherever you of course you are placed or you are put. Is that clear? So that's what CBI refers to, that is interest of the learner is important and relevance of the content to the learner is more important. So the content has several purposes. For example, this content, first, it provides a rich context for the language classroom, right? So that is, I mean, that the content that you use, relevance of the content is important. And why it is important? Because it gives you a good context for the classroom, right? If it is relevant to the business students, relevant to the engineering students, relevant to the computer students, so that would create, again, a good classroom environment. For example, if it is not relevant to the computer sciences, for example, so that those students would not enjoy it. And that's why we say that when you teach business students, when you teach English to business students, and they call it business communication as well, so over there try to quote examples from the industry, from the business world. When you teach, I mean, for example, language, then you can give general examples. Right? So that's why, of course, you need to be proficient in giving relevant examples, right? So this creates environment, and that allows the teacher to present and explain specific language features. Additionally, it provides for what Stephen Krashen calls comprehensible input. Right? You can agree with this Stephen Krashen that we call it what? Comprehensible input. So dear student, this is what content-based instruction, CBI, refers to, right? So, and you know that input should be comprehensible. And how will it be comprehensible input? If it is relevant to the learner, and if it is, in fact, if it is interesting, if it is enjoyable, you will see that, of course, teaching would be easy, teaching would be useful, and learning would be equally, I mean, of course, better, and both learner and the teacher would be in an environment where they will be teaching and learning language, and there will be more interaction, they would be relevant, there would be interest, and of course things would be smooth. This is what we call it, that is content-based instructions. Now what is background to this CBI, content-based instruction, right? Of course, if you go back, the language teaching on content is not a new idea. If you go back to grammar translation method, if you go back to other methods we talked about, so content has been very important. It is not a new thing that, of course, now we focus on the content, right? So from the beginning, right, this content, of course, has been given due importance, right? So CBI first appeared in the mid-1980s with the population, right, with the publication of Bernard Mohan's work, Language and Content. This was the work, in fact, in 1980s, and this work appeared, published. So then we started talking of this theory, CBI. Then Brinton, Snow and Veshe, of course, 1989, identified several prototype forms of CBI, namely theme-based language instruction, sheltered content instruction, and adjunct instruction, right, for English. And then this is adjunct, if I repeat for you, right, what is adjunct instruction? University level ESL students are enrolled in paired or adjunct English and psychology classes. Both the teachers of psychology and English, in fact, they correspond, they work together, right? And we call it adjunct instruction when they are given instruction in psychology, of course, with the help of English as well. This is, we call it adjunct instruction. So dear student, this is what the background to CBI, and all these prototype forms are real life situations. Differences among these models we will see later on. Clear? So this is a brief background to content-based instruction. Your handbook will give you details, right? So far we have seen that it is not a new idea that we focus on the content, right? In mid-1980s, see Bernard Mohan's the work, in fact, that you see started talking of this content, and then these three people, I mean Brinton, Snow and Veshe, they identified several prototypes of CBI, that is theme-based instruction. Theme is important. Still, of course, you see at Montessori level, they give different themes to the students, right? So theme-based instruction, then sheltered content instructions, right? Sheltered, right? And then adjunct instructions. And then, of course, there are differences we will see later on. Now, again, the point is that what is the background is content-based instruction? Population. We're talking about the differences. Like I said in the previous slide, that what are these differences? Fine? Among these models, right? Now, these differences are on the basis of what? Population and setting. Right? First, on the first point is that you see you can differentiate between these three. What? If you go back here, prototypes mean what? Adjunct instructions, theme-based, and first one is, that is sheltered. So there are differences. First one is population setting. Theme-based instruction is the most generally applicable. Theme-based is the most generally applicable. It is appropriate at virtually any level of language learning and a wide variety of setting. Talking about population and talking about this theme-based instruction, that which level it is appropriate, right? So we see that this theme-based instruction is, of course, most applicable, appropriate at virtually any level of language learning and a wide variety of settings. Sheltered and adjunct instructions are restricted in their applicability. See, if we talk about theme-based, it's broad. Whereas in sheltered and adjunct, they are restricted to their what? Applicability. Sheltered courses are typically found in middle schools and high schools, where large population of learners receive subject matter instruction in a language other than their first language. This is what we call it, sheltered and adjunct instructions, right? Third, of course, mean, if you see there are two, of course, but they are limited in their applicability. Sheltered courses are typically found in middle schools and high schools, whereas large population of learners receive subject matter instruction in a language other than their first language. Adjunct courses are found in settings where students are studying language as well as subject matter, such as high school, colleges and universities. That is what adjunct courses. Because they are suitable for a setting where learners are studying language as well as subject matter. For example, university students, right? High schools and colleges and universities, where learners take language as a sport course as well. In colleges, of course, where English is a second language, you have ESL courses are there, right? So dear students, this is what important, that you see where in colleges or universities where students come for the professional courses, professional degrees, over there they have to have their sport courses. For example, you're talking about the Pakistani culture. Here, of course, people enroll themselves in BBA program. So they have to take, in fact, 12 credit hours for English language. They call it English comprehension, business communication, and of course technical writing. So is the case in engineering. So is the case in, of course, in computer sciences, right? So in this way, they have to take this as a sport course. So dear student, this is what we see, that what are the differences in the population and setting among these three, what we call them, that is theme-based instructions, adjunct instructions, and first one, that is sheltered content instructions. So now moving on to focus on lesson focus, in fact. So my dear student, in fact, focus on language in theme-based instruction, right? As far as the focus in theme-based instruction is concerned, so focus on language in theme-based instructions, right? And on content as in sheltered instructions, on both as in adjunct instructions. So first criteria was to differentiate between adjunct-based instructions, sheltered content instructions, and the theme-based instruction was population, right? So in population setting, we see that, of course, which instructions are suitable for the theme-based, adjunct, and in fact the third one. Now, second point that you can differentiate between these three set of instructions is what? Focus, right? And which focus? Lesson focus, my dear students. So theme-based instruction focuses on language. Well, students, so we talk about this focus of lesson, or the lesson focus. Now, selection of content, right? Again, of course, is a distinguishing feature between these three set of instructions. So content of language class often overlaps with that of students' subject matter, right? There is an overlap, in fact, between the subject matter and, of course, content of the language. Clear? How it overlaps? My dear students, if you see it again, that the language content often overlaps with that of the student's subject matter, right? I mean, the point is that, of course, if the students' subject matter is, for example, they are preparing themselves for the physics, in fact, or chemistry, or some other course they are doing, and then this language content, of course, definitely these days the medium of instruction is international language, right? So and again, it's a debatable thing. There are people who are against this practice of teaching, in fact, physics in a foreign language or in a second language, right? So they feel that physics, of course, students can understand well if it is taught in their language one, right? So that in that way, and these people they consider it, because due to the fact that they say that language content creates a barrier for the students to grasp that concepts in physics, chemistry, or biology, or computer sciences, right? So these people, they feel that these instructions should be given in their language one, and they quote examples of Korea, China, right? These are, of course, advanced countries. They are the rich countries. They are the developed countries. But the point is, over their instructions for the science and technology, the instructions are given in their language one, right? And then degree of faculty coordination. So adjunct instructions is quite different from the other two models in this respect, since it requires the systematic coordination of the language and content instructor. Like I said, I told you, ESL and psychology, these two teachers, in fact, they go side by side, they communicate with one another. So that's why more coordination is required in adjunct fine, instruction, right? It is different from other ways in this way, that it requires a systematic coordination of the language and content instructions. So that is, my dear students, of course, these were some ways we can differentiate between these three instructions: adjunct instructions, right? And then theme-based instructions, and third one is that is what content-based instructions. And then again, how we differentiate on the basis of population, on the basis of focus, on the basis of content, and on the basis of coordination. A recent innovation in CBI is sustained that content language teaching. There is a new thing in this CBI, we call it content language teaching, in fact, right? Content language teaching, and SCLT, fine, involves a focus on a single content area or career topic, and Murphy and Stoller, they have, it is their research, right? It says that that you see, content language instruction, right? That's content language instructions, this is important, and they call it SCLT, involves a focus on a single content area, right? And Murphy and Stoller, the use of sustained content, S for sustained, right? So this says that CBI is sustained content language teaching, S for sustained. And according to Murphy, the use of sustained content stimulates the conditions and demands of the subject matter classroom. In fact, it allows language learners to more deeply engage the content in the process acquiring the academic vocabulary and language skills needed for the mainstream, right? And this does not require coordination of the language teacher with the content area expert. So this is a very important point. If you have a look at it, you might understand this, that the use of sustained content stimulates the conditions and demands of the subject matter, because SCLT, right? And then it allows language learners to more deeply engage the content in the process for acquiring the academic vocabulary and language skills needed for the mainstream, right? And does not require any coordination like adjunct instructions require of the language teacher with a content area expert. So they call it SCLT, sustained, right, content language teaching. In fact, I hope you understand. This is a research by Murphy and Stoller. Okay, now this was the short background, right, on this CCBI. So principles for content-based instructions. What are the principles for content-based instruction? First principle is that this base instructional decisions on content rather than language criteria. First principle. So content is important, right? And you see, the theory is content-based instruction. So CBI bases instructional decisions on content rather than language criteria. What to teach, what should be the content, right? And how to order these items. Like generally, of course, when you're talking about tenses, right, in language teaching, and of course we start with the present simple tense, and then we move on to continuous, move on to present perfect and present perfect continuous, and then we move on to the past tense. So here mean how to order these items. In grammar translation method, it was thought that certain language items, simple present tense, were more readily acquired than others. The decision was made to include these items in the beginning. People saw that if you start with the present simple tense, you can move on well. Otherwise, you could have started with the past tense, right? And now, of course, still people feel that there are some tenses which we can exclude, right? So you must teach students about the present tense and, of course, the past tense and then the future tense. And these sentence structures, of course, we need more, right? CBI takes a rather radical departure from this approach. It allows the choice of content to dedicate or influence the selection and sequencing of language items. So how CBI in fact, of course, departs from it. Like we're talking about the principles for content-based instructions. CBI says that, you see, takes a radical change, departure from this approach. It allows the choice of content to dictate or influence the selection and sequencing of language items. This is what CBI says, right? Then another principle is integrate skills, right? CBI practitioners use an integrated skills approach to language teaching, covering all 4 skills as well as vocabulary and grammar. Now again, right, this is the principle of CBI, and you see, you all agree with this, that when you integrate the skills, learning of course improves, right? You can get your, of course, you can objectives, right? You can achieve your goals if you integrate the skills, and this is what CBI talks about. That, you see, this CBI talks that, you see, integrated skills approach to language teaching. And of course, I mean, it is quite natural as well, right? This makes sense that when you teach speaking skills, and it doesn't mean that you altogether ignore listening skills or you altogether put other skills aside. No, integration is there. And of course, when you talk, right, when you communicate, you have to integrate speaking skills. You speak and you listen, and if you need to, you can write a message as well. So this is what the CBI says, that integrate skills, right? Another principle, my dear students, is that what involves students actively in all phases of learning process. Either it is a presentation phase, the beginning, or it is a practice, or either it is a production. So involve students. This is very important. Involvement of the student, my dear students, in language teaching does more, right? Because if the students are involved in an activity, so they learn, in fact, right? And they learn more. If they are not involved in an activity, no matter the activity is the best of all, but that activity, I mean, may be useless for you. Why? Because, you see, learners' involvement in the activity. And how can you enhance learners' involvement in the activity? For this, your activity should be well designed. Your activity should be well thought out, right? A well thought out activity, a well designed activity, a well planned activity, a well executed activity naturally involves the learners, in fact. So teacher has to be very active, right? Teacher, I mean, of course, if the teacher is active in the class, so he would expect involvement of the students. If the teacher considers everybody valuable in the class, if the teacher gives attention to all, if the teacher considers that everybody is equal in the class and they all are here to learn, right? And this way, of course, there would be equality in the class. Generally, we see what happens, that sometimes students they say that they are not given due importance in the class. In the class, only 10 to 15 students are given due importance. However, others are ignored, right? So in this way, my dear students, that the CBI talks about involvement of the students in all phases, in fact. From the beginning till the end, you need to involve them. CBI classroom is learner rather than teacher-centered, right? So approach is learner-centered approach, where you keep your learner in mind, right? Your learners are important. Fine. In such classrooms, students learn through doing and are actively engaged in the learning process, right? They do not depend on the teacher to direct and learning or to be the source of all information. So again, self-reliance, right? Students, in fact, they realize that, you see, they have to put efforts. So this is what the CBI classroom, that students learn through doing and are actively engaged in the learning process. So more, I mean, learning by doing. You see, we discussed that. Of course, the things that you learn by doing, you learn more. You can retain more, in fact, right? So people, in fact, involve themselves and they perform different activities in the class. Central to CBI, very important to CBI, is the belief that learning occurs not only through exposure to the teacher's input, but also through peer input and interactions. Students help each other, in fact, and that help, I mean, sometimes that help even goes a step ahead of the teacher's help. Because naturally, of course, when the students, they know each other, they are the friends, they are, of course, they can interact with one another, they are at ease with one another, they can ask questions. Sometimes it happens that the students shy in the class to ask many questions. However, when they are sitting together and they can ask questions to their peers. So this peer input, of course, is important. Interaction in the class, of course, is central to CBI class when the learners, they help one another. Accordingly, in fact, students assumes active social roles in the classroom that involve interactive learning, negotiations, information gathering, and construction of meaning. This is what, my dear students, of course, happens in the CBI class. So what happens, this principle says that involve the students in all phases of learning process. This involvement of the learner, in fact, saves 9, right? So environment should be conducive in the class where input can come from the peers, input can come from the teacher, and students would realize their responsibilities. They would realize that they have to put efforts, of course. Their personal efforts are also important. Another principle is choose content for its relevance to the students. Like we discussed initially, that CBI refers to what? The content that is relevant to the learner, and of course that is interesting for the learner, right? So it's this content for its relevance to the students' lives, interest, and or academic goals. This is important. So whatever the content you choose for teaching, again, it is very important. You have to think over it again and again. And this is a big problem, my dear students, in the process of the teaching. What generally people, what they do, that whatever they receive, fine, and they try executing it. Of course, if for example, after completing this program, if you get an opportunity to teach, so the one way is that simply you follow the methodology that have been used on you, and you move on, and then your students, once they would instruct us and they would follow your policies, and this becomes a chain cycle. So the point is that people, of course, yes, it doesn't mean that whatever your teachers have selected is wrong, right? But that content may not be relevant for this age. Maybe whatever my teachers, in fact, selected to teach me, that was fine then, 10 years back. But now in the present era, where you have technology, where you have internet, and where you have, of course, we have the mobiles, and you have 3G and 4G, in fact, facilities. So things may not be useful now. So that's why when you choose content for its relevance to the students' lives, now students, of course, there was a time that this net was not there. But now everybody has access to, in the class you will see people have their access to internet. So that is important. So when you choose the content, right, it should be relevant to the students' lives, and you need to know the students, of course, right? And then their interest level, of course, or academic goals, important. Another important principle is, my dear students, what? It's like authentic tasks and tasks. This is very important, right? Authentic texts, my dear students, and the task, of course, they are important for CBI. A key component of CBI is authenticity, both of the text used in the classroom and the task that the learners are asked to perform. Authentic task, in fact. The text should also be authentic. So again, you have to find out the text, authenticity of the text. It can be taken from from a book, of course, from any resource book, from any magazine, from any journal, and you have to have reference of it. So authentic text is important. And then the task that you use then should be the genuine. That generally happens in the, of course, in the organizations. So, and that's why people say that CBI is a very good theory for teaching business English, right? So over there, the task that you see, the task that I mean, business communicators have to perform. That the task is that they have to open an account in the bank. The task is that they have to remit money. The task is that they have to transfer money. The task is that they have to apply for ATM. So these tasks will be authentic. What is authenticity? Right, Hutchinson and Waters define what? Authentic text as those that are not originally constructed for language teaching purposes. You can use a newspaper, for example. So newspaper that is not for constructed for the language teaching, but you bring it, in fact, and you use it. That is authenticity, right? So thus an extract from a content area like book, cartoon, lyrics, popular song, or a short story would all qualify as authentic sources. I mean, these sources are not, made for language teaching, but you people bring them, right? You can pick a chunk from a novel, you can bring a clipping from a movie, from a drama, from a newspaper, from anywhere. So that is what authentic task, and the definition is given to you. I hope you have understood. And the principle is draw overt attention to language features. Very important, right? What does it in fact mean? The purpose of CBI is to express learners, in fact, to authentic input with the goal of their being able to use language for communicative purposes, right? This is what to help learners, in fact. The purpose of this CBI is to help learners to what? To expose learners to authentic input, right? With the goal of their being able to use language for communicative purposes. This is what CBI is. And the text from the primary input source in the CBI classroom with the additional input provided by the teacher and peers. Over attention, in fact. Then all of these provides what? Comprehensible input, like we talked about question initially. CBI, it departs from this, right? From some of CBI departs from some other approaches to language teaching in its belief that comprehensible input alone will not lead to successful language acquisition, right? Here CBI in fact departs. What CBI says, that helping people to express themselves well, right? And the text from the primary input source in the CBI classroom with additional input provided by the teacher and peers, and all of these provides comprehensible input, right? So that's why the principle is that draw overt attention to language features. Now the classroom techniques and tasks in CBI classroom, right? So dear students, of course, we talked about these techniques, right? Of course, in our last semester as well. But the CBI particularly, that what are the classroom techniques and tasks in the CBI classroom? Techniques and tasks used in the CBI classroom are familiar ones to anyone who practices communicative language teaching. So you could see that, of course, the CLT, communicative language teaching, and CBI teaching, of course, more or less they are similar. Whatever techniques that you use in CLT, in fact, communicative language teaching, where you help learners to communicate language, where you give confidence to the students, where your focus is on communicative approach, that the students should be able to express themselves well. So, CBI more or less talks about the same. Some of the techniques and activities commonly found in CBI classrooms, pair and group work, are the hallmark of the communicative language classroom. We talk about that CLT, that there is more pair work and more group work is there. So in CBI, they entail the discussion or exchange of information related to the content unit. Fine. In pair or group work, the teacher first presents the task, then advises students and sets a time limit for completion of the task. So this dialogue that we use in this CBI, or the group work that we use, or the pair work that we use. So the difference is that here, right, we bring the attention of the learners to the content of that unit, right? Whatever, of course, the part of that lesson we are talking about. So your pair work or the group work revolves around that. So this is what we see in the CBI, that the discussion or exchange of the information related to the content unit. I mean, again, the focus is on the content. Whatever the pair work is being done in the class, or it is a group work, so content stands alone. Content is the center of the gravity. Content is the most important point. Content is the focus, right? So if there is a dialogue, it's a group work, or it's a pair work, so we cannot put content aside. Content should be part and parcel of that activity. Information gap, again, another classroom activity, is a form that for pair work in which participants are each given different price of information, and they, in fact, of course, one participant has been to UK, and the other participant, of course, wants to know about the culture of UK. So there are some information gap activities. Or one student has visited a library, and the other, in fact, intends to know about it. So there could be some information gap activities using only language. They must communicate to fill in the missing gaps in the information, right? And then this is one, information gap activities. But next that we have, my dear students, jigsaw is another variation of information gap, right? This is another, of course, information gap. Students are first divided into expert groups, with each group given a different piece of information. Once the students in each group have become familiar with their piece of the jigsaw, they are regrouped, in fact. So jigsaw activities are also used in your CBI. Then graphic organizers involve the use of visuals that assist in organizing information. They can consist of diagrams, tables, and clusters. Again, that's another classroom activity. We call it graphic organizers. The teacher may use these graphic organizers to present information or guide students brainstorming. Like visuals is, for example, different visuals, right? You must have, heard, or you must have seen business communication teachers that they focus on the visual aids, right? And because why visual aids are important, why these tables are important, why these graphic organizers are important, because these things communicate more, right? And of course, interest of the audience is more if these graphic organizers have been used. So my dear students, these are some of the classroom activities that we can use here, in fact. Now, classroom activities and tasks in the CBI classroom. So discussions and debates. If you move on more, very important part of your CBI, teaching, content-based instruction, discussions and debates. Now, what are discussions, by the way? It can be open discussion, in fact, right? So any topic, of course, can be given to the students, right? Or we can have a hot topic, right? So therefore, the topic we have to be relevant to that, right? Topic can be population, topic can be freedom of speech, topic can be, in fact, of course, you can say phobia, topic can be hydrophobia. So, and then you in fact help students discuss the topic, in fact. So again, they would be relevant to the topic. So content is that if the topic is communication, so student will be talking about what is communication. They'll be talking about 7 C's of communication. They'll be talking about a good communication. They're talking about the bad communication. So this goes on. There will be discussion on that, right? And in this way, of course, it's a class, and there are 15 students, there are 20 students, and there 20 ideas would come. So more discussion, but again, the one plus point is that people would would involve themselves in that activity. They would enjoy this activity, and again they would be relevant to the topic, because topic is what? Population. Topic is pollution, in fact. So, or it could be debates, right? And debates, of course, once maybe when you have not initially, but after some time, you can have debates in the class. Once you feel that, well, the students now, they are able to express themselves, right? And they can support, they can speak for a proposition, or they can go against the proposition. And in this way, they learn how to argue their case, right? So, you know that, students, that the persuasion is very important element of communication. If you want to persuade somebody, you have to have logical arguments, you have to have reasons with you, and what you do, that you give your viewpoints, you give your arguments, you speak for it or you speak against it. And when you have to speak for a proposition, definitely you have to think, you have to bring arguments to justify your viewpoint. So the students, debates are also important part of what? Communicative content-based instruction. And debates, in fact, help students to think rationally, right? And debates also help students to give rebuttals, right? To answers to a query, answers to a statement given by the students. So they in fact, on a very good platform, fine, they try to be relevant to the topic. And by being relevant, of course, relevant to the topic, they also try to give their arguments, right? And they know that these arguments are evaluated, are judged by the judges sitting there, and the teacher can be a judge there if it's a debate activity. And both discussions and debates, they are important in CCBI, and they, in fact, in debates and discussions, these activities help the students, in fact, involve themselves, right? And above all, I mean, students want to, right? So these things, in fact, jog their memories and develop interest of the students, that they need to be able to express themselves. And of course, just speaking may not be a difficult job, but once you have to speak to convince somebody, may be a difficult job. So that's why they learn how to persuade, they learn how to inform. Role play is again very important, right, activity for this CBI class. You can give them different roles, and again, that which role, that is from the content, from the lesson you are talking about, right? So if you are talking about, if you have discussed about airports, so then you can have a role play about the airport, where people can a role play between an FIA agent and a customer, between an immigration officer and a customer. So in this way, different role plays can be assigned, and yes, they can act out that role play, and they try to be relevant to the topic given, in fact. And role plays, of course, we had a detailed discussion on role play, that of course when students are given a role, they try to put themselves in that role. And once they put themselves in that role, they can imagine, they can start thinking like those roles. And here sometimes, of course, some people have this acting skills, the abilities to act, so this role plays can bring out their acting skills, and sometimes they can be professionals in this way, right? Some students act out in such a way that, of course, audience love that acting, right? And the student, while acting, may realize that, well, he has this potential to act, right? And second thing is, of course, sometimes maybe in the real life you cannot achieve something, so in that role play you can achieve whatever you want to, right? Teacher can give input, in fact, for that role play if the students need. First, the teacher can ask them to have their own input, and the teacher can add value to it. So it's important. Survey tasks, again, it's very important. You can give them some questions, right? Questionnaires can be given. Students do survey, they go to the market. The survey can be oral, survey can be written, in fact, right? A questionnaire can be given where the students bring the results of that, right? So it could be an oral survey where students have to, go to market, they have to visit different banks to know about that, for example, if you give this project to business students, that well, visit different banks and ask about the account details, that how many accounts does the bank open, what is the minimum, of course, balance requirement, right, and which currencies they open account, and what other details. So in this way, students can visit, they can ask, they can meet the concerned person, they might meet the customer services representative, right, and they can get information, they can ask questions, of course. So survey tasks, again, they are important. Why? Because the students, they have to go to the field, fine, they have to interact with people, and this interaction help them making more relations. Fine, they ask question in English and they get the reply. Fine, and sometimes they record that dialogue, or sometimes they write the answers. In this way, they visit different banks and bring back, right, information in the class, and they can tell the class that they have visited 6 banks, and all 6 banks, in fact, they open account in 3 currencies, in USD, and pound sterling, and euro. And then they might conclude that, well, it is not that the banks they can open account, but it is the policy of the state bank. State bank has directed banks to open account in these 3 currencies. So that's why bank cannot open accounts in other currencies. So it is as per the instruction of SBP, they have to follow it. So survey tasks are also important. Why they are? Because the students take interest in the survey, in doing survey, in fact, in visiting markets and getting information from the field. So in this way, what happens? They interact with people and they learn more. In fact, they learn about the behavior of the people, because once they go to the survey, in fact, they see different people. In fact, some are good, some are bad, some are average, right? And they come back and they share their experiences. So survey task, again, is very important, because and again, because it's a CBI, and you can give them a specific topic, and accordingly students can do that survey. Process writing, again, is very important, of course, right? That we had a discussion on that, on process, that we see the focus on the process of writing, in fact. Now, what is the process of writing? In fact, making students write, right? For motivating students to work on the process of writing, what is process writing? In fact, researching, writing, meeting people, brainstorming, right? So everything comes in writing, and the process of writing, that of course you need to work on the process. What is the writing process itself? And then again, very important is problem solving, right? A problem can be given to the students, and they can be asked in a group to see this problem, see its pros and cons, and find a solution to it. Generally, of course, problem solving is given to the business students, because the business students, they are going to be the future decision makers. So if the teacher develops their habit here in the class, that well, they are given a situation and they are asked to in fact solve this problem. So problem solving, again, it's a very important classroom technique that can be used, and that can, some people are very good decision makers, some are very good problem solvers. So in this way, once you give them an activity to solve a problem, they try. Or there is another problem example, you see, helping people, in fact. Some are very good in organizing events, right? So an event can be organized. Students can be asked to invite a resource person on English language skills. So in this way, right, these classroom activities can be utilized, right, in the best possible way. So another one is, of course, because sequencing, right? So involves students rearranging events or pieces of information into their logical order. This type of task is especially useful in the teaching of reading and listening, how you sequence things. So sequencing is very important. Another classroom activity in CCBI. What happens is that, of course, maybe you can give different chunks of a sentence and you ask the students to put them in order, right? Maybe you give them different pieces of a dialogue, and you can ask them, this is a dialogue, and put it in order, or ranking things, right? So of course, definitely rankings mean that hierarchy of something, in fact, that of course you can set priority, or you rank things, right? Of course, this is number 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can, ranking can be a classroom activity. Values clarification involves students taking a stand, agreeing or disagreeing on controversial statements related to a chosen topic. So agree or disagree and then give your stance. Again, this can be a useful activity for this CBI classroom, because here what happens that you see you give a proposal to a topic, and then your students ask random case that this is your area and you must support this. And how would you support? You have to give your stance, right? You have to be adamant. You have to give your logical or arguments to support that. And there's another person, of course, who speaks against it. So, dear students, this is what today's lecture on CBI, content-based instruction. Very important. I told you initially that we'll be talking about, of course, how to support learning in the process. And one, in fact, important area is content-based instruction. So CBI also, in fact, supports learning process. And what CBI does, that of course CBI and some other, most of its commonly practiced models, theme-based, sheltered, adjunct, and SCLT, right? These are, of course, we talked about in this lecture particularly, and these are the models, right? We talked about CBI model, we talk about theme-based, we talk about sheltered, we talk about adjunct and SCLT. Fine. We have, of course, situated CBI within the broader paradigm of CLT. We see that, of course, CLT is again communicative language teaching, and then activities of CLT, and you can say CBI, the overlap, articulated the underlying principles of CBI and shown how these principles mesh with those of the communicatively oriented classrooms. The classroom extracts illustrate the underlying principles in action. They provide a clear picture of how content and language provide complementary aspects of the curriculum, and how the input, of course, rich input of the CBI classroom can lead to a successful language environment. So we saw that, of course, CBI refers to content-based instruction. CBI keeps in mind the interest of the learners, right? And CBI makes a class that is the student-centered class rather than a teacher-centered class. So in this, of course, in CBI, what happens that when you make activities, right, when you make activities, you keep in mind that, of course, what is the content under discussion, and activities should be designed accordingly, right? If you teach the computer science students, if you teach business students, if you teach economics students, so activities, while designing activities, you must keep in mind the discipline that the students are following. You are teaching, of course, English, but you see, if you teach that in that particular the context, if you quote examples from economics, you quote examples and examples from IR. If you're teaching IR students, you teach engineering students, and if you quote examples from engineering, so these, this teaching would be more effective because it is content based, right? And secondly, examples are from that area, and of course this would help the students because they would go for the interview, they would go for such activities, so they would easily incorporate the examples which have been discussed in the class, or they would be easily think of examples that are relevant to the content which is being discussed. So CBI is one of the methods for supporting the learning process, and people say that as a sport course, when you teach English to the business graduates who teach English to even CS students, computer science students, or in fact other students, so CBI can help you, because over there you have to focus on the content. Yet you cannot put the content aside, right? If you just teach only with one aspect, you have to teach language by putting the computer science aside, so even students lose interest. So interest of the student, right, is important, and then whatever you teach, make it relevant. right? I mean, of course, and that's why need analysis of the students is also important. If you perform that need analysis, if you do this need analysis, you would select the content. Again, choosing a content is also very important, that which content to be chosen. And that's why whenever you are given a course to teach, in fact, particularly for the ESP, English for specific purpose, then you need to take time, right? I mean, in that phase, what do you do? That you get material, you choose the content that is relevant to the course that is being offered, and again, interest of the learners is there. You see, if the learners take interest in a course, and if it's relevant to the degree program, which is, I mean, it would be very good. And again, that of course you need to know that what are the program objectives, what are the objectives of the course being taught, and how well you could move on. So with this, it's a time to say goodbye to all of you. See you in the next class. So in the next class, we'll talk about another important element that would help us in supporting our learning process, and in that lecture we'll be talking about how to use course books for teaching language, right? Definitely, of course, the course book is an important area, and maybe we will see what to do or how well to use a course book for language teaching. Thank you very much. See you in the next class.